Hello, ladies. This episode is sponsored by the Fiat Institute. So if you've been listening to our show for any amount of time, you likely know that Fiat Institute is a company that I, Jamie Rocci, co-host of the Hormone Genius podcast, own. I started this organization a couple years ago, and I certify women to become hormone coaches. So it's likely that as you're listening to our episodes, you are feeling a deep conviction to serve the women in your world. But you may think to yourself, wait, I can't. I haven't gone to med school. I'm not a nurse. I don't have an advanced degree in a healthcare arena. Well, I have some good news for you, ladies, because I created this program for you. I created this program for the woman who wants to start a hormone coaching business and make a change in this world. So if you are looking to make an impact while making an income, again, be sure to visit my website, www.fiatinstitute.com. You can also find me on Instagram at Fiat Institute. Fiat Institute is where hormones meet humor and heart. I hope to be in touch with you soon and enjoy our episode.
I do want women to know that there is an alternative to suppressing their bodies with hormones, that they can see their body as a good and they can live in that body holistically.
Totally. Oh my gosh.
It's amazing.
Join co-hosts Jamie Rocci and Teresa Kenny as they educate women about the beauty of the feminine design and empower women to take charge of their health.
They're going to be so amazing. You're going to be so empowered by understanding your feminine genius and your hormone genius. I don't think I could live my whole life knowing this and not sharing it with anyone.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Hormone Genius podcast. Today, Teresa and I are ready to rock and roll and talk about all the wonderful, beautiful ways that magnesium helps our bodies and helps our hormones. So Teresa, are you ready to rock and roll and talk about magnesium today?
I am ready. I prepared myself by listening to a lot of stuff about magnesium. Yesterday, I had the day off. And so I just spent a lot of time just soaking up magnesium. And then literally, I took a bunch of magnesium yesterday in honor of this episode, which I might have paid for in the end. Every time I'd listen to somebody be like, oh my gosh, magnesium is the greatest thing ever. And I'd be like, go get some more magnesium, Teresa. Pass it out to all your children. So that's how like excited I am about magnesium.
You're like excited though in a very like cool way though, like chill.
Maybe not. Maybe not.
Okay.
No.
Awesome. Well, let's start off just by sharing with our listeners, what is magnesium? And I know there are several forms of magnesium. So maybe even in that, starting conversation, we could touch on that too. And then we can really dig into some of the forms you like the best, Teresa.
Yeah. So magnesium is the fourth largest mineral in our bodies. So it's classified as a mineral, but it's also classified as a positively charged ion. So kind of like in that, sodium, potassium, phosphorus, and all of the different ways that they work together in the cell. Magnesium is within that as well in terms of how our cells work. Now, when you say forms, Jamie, in our body, magnesium is just one form. It's just magnesium. So we'll talk about forms in terms of supplements as we kind of dig deeper. But, first, let's talk about why magnesium is so important. Magnesium is basically, you'll hear this, and I feel like in some ways that's a little tongue in cheek because I feel like everybody says it. So I don't even want to say it the same way. But magnesium is a cofactor in over like 300 functions in your body. And actually, it's probably much higher, but that generally is what gets said. It's a cofactor. And what I mean is like, it's kind of like the gatekeeper of so many different things in the body in terms of how our tissues function, in terms of how our brain functions, in terms of how our hormones work, Jamie. So it is the great gatekeeper. And without it, our body cannot do these like cellular transactions that it needs to do. For example, if we first talk about just magnesium in our bones, magnesium is really what keeps our bones from building appropriately and kind of that great balance between, if you remember, if any of you are biology people, the osteoclast and the osteoblast, it keeps the great balance between building bone and then discarding what we don't need in bone. So it's very important to bone health. And in fact, probably way more important in some ways than calcium. I think we always think of calcium, but without magnesium, you cannot utilize vitamin D appropriately. And so in the bones, it just becomes, again, this great important modulator of using the other minerals to make sure that our bones stay strong and healthy. So bone health is one, nerves would be the other. So nerve transmission. So of course, in nerve transactions, we have this kind of like, it's like this messenger system. And at the end of it, we need something to kind of like cause a reaction, an action and reaction type of a thing in nerve transmission. And again, magnesium is there. And if it's not there, we cannot signal appropriately in our nerves. So this comes to magnesium when we're talking about like the neurotransmitters. And we have 100 neurotransmitters in our brain. And without magnesium, these neurotransmitters don't work very well. So if you ever hear about people talking about anxiety and mood changes with magnesium, this is where this fits in, because without magnesium, we really can't utilize our nerves the way that we need to. This is true of muscles. So again, athletes, it's super important for athletes to be generous in magnesium, because without magnesium, our muscles cannot, work appropriately. So for example, if you have muscle twitching or muscle cramps, it could be a sign that you're deficient in magnesium. And again, when you think about the reactions of muscles being able to work together, without magnesium, we can't really function appropriately and use those muscles to create energy. So magnesium is in this great thing we called ATP. Without magnesium, we don't make ATP. So it's like one of the fundamental minerals that we need for energy. And I could go on and on, Jamie, but this is just like the first part of like how great magnesium is in our body.
Yeah, no kidding. So our body internally creates magnesium, or is it something that only we receive externally?
Only receive externally. So we do not make magnesium in our body. So it has to come from an external source. So I think that's another reason why this is so important, because many of us, in fact, studies have shown that about 70% of us are not getting enough magnesium in our diets.
Wow.
And there's a variety of reasons why that has occurred.
So what would be some ways we know that we're not getting enough magnesium? I suppose you said that it plays a crucial role in ATP. So, maybe we don't want to go here yet. We can maybe touch on it and dig as deep as you think, Teresa, unless there's other things you really want to dig into. But my first thought is, gosh, am I low in magnesium? All of our listeners wondering, I wonder if I'm low in magnesium. What would be some symptoms someone might notice besides fatigue, in muscle twitching, that they may be low in magnesium?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think like vitamin D, I think, we can kind of presume if over half of the population, that they've studied is not getting enough, then you could probably safely put yourself in that. And that's why when we talk about this, we're going to presume probably most of us are going to need a little extra. That doesn't necessarily mean taking a supplement. However, it may mean really looking at your diet and making sure you're getting enough magnesium in your diet. But based on what we know about magnesium deficiency, certainly I think majority of us would be in the place where we're likely to be in need of some more magnesium. So symptoms, Jamie, like you said, so fatigue. And I think that's an interesting one, because I don't think a lot of us would think, fatigue is what I mean, like magnesium deficiency, fatigue. I don't know. That's not something I really thought of. But when we look at magnesium's direct role in creating ATP for energy, absolutely, it could be that. And of course, a lot of these symptoms, could they be explained by something else? Yeah, of course. But let's just kind of pretend like if magnesium really was deficient, these are the things that you would experience: fatigue, insomnia, possibly chronic pain, because if we have high inflammation, which we know magnesium modulates inflammation in the body, you can get chronic pain from that. Constipation. So we know people, when they're not moving their bowels regularly, could be low in magnesium, because the magnesium helps to keep our peristalsis going. Numbness and tingling, that could be kind of in the muscle area, the cramping in the muscles and the twitches, poor concentration, memory issues or brain fog, mood disorders, including anxiety for sure, depression as well, heart palpitations, or even heart arrhythmias, because magnesium also regulates our heart rhythm. Why? Because the heart is a muscle. And again, there's just this super important part of magnesium in our muscles as well. So those are some of the symptoms for magnesium deficiency.
Man, oh man. And the very fact that magnesium, again, is an external source, we need to bring it in to function well. And, you know, if we know that magnesium plays a role in so many processes, I know magnesium is being talked about a lot, but I think we should talk about magnesium more. So I'm glad this is the topic of today's episode, Teresa. So thankful. I know, like with magnesium, typically when I think of magnesium, I think it is for calming, just like you were saying, you know, the insomnia, the anxiety. Anytime I hear a woman that I'm working with talk about those things, I'm thinking, okay, what is her progesterone levels like? And let's start magnesium. And of course, we always want clients and people listening to talk with their doctors before trying any new supplements, of course, but magnesium is very easy to find. But let's talk about even the form of the magnesiums that you like best in terms of the supplements, because we know that there are different forms. As you said, magnesium is magnesium to our body, but maybe explain how, you know, what kinds of forms we can go to, and also give us more information on what you said earlier in our episode. Like magnesium is magnesium, but yet there are different forms. So I know that was a lot just then, but maybe we could.
Yeah. I mean, essentially, like in order for our body to absorb magnesium, it has to be carried, you know, by something. So it has to be carried by something in order for our intestines to basically get it to the liver, or if it's transdermal, to get it into the bloodstream. So it has to be carried by something. So when we talk about forms that, you know, are bioavailable, that means that our body is going to take that magnesium and actually absorb a good portion of it. We're going to want to look at the chelated forms or chelated forms of magnesium. And that just means, again, it's like it's helping it because it's binding to the magnesium and allowing it to be passed into the body. So the chelated forms would be the ones that you hear about, glycinate, magnesium glycinate, or biglycinate, which is the same thing, basically. Magnesium malate, magnesium taurate, magnesium threonate. And then there's some like others that are called like magnesium complex. There's magnesium lactate. There's a lot of forms of magnesium, but I think, you know, for the sake of simpleness, we're going to focus mostly probably on magnesium glycinate, malate, and threonate. Those are my favorite three kinds of magnesium. And I might use different forms for different reasons. Now, there's other ones that you hear about, so I'll just mention those. Magnesium oxide is probably what you see mostly in kind of the general store over the counter. And then the other one is magnesium citrate also, because those are the ones that are used often for laxatives. Yeah. But they're not as bioavailable. That just means that when you take them, they're going to stay mostly in the intestine and they're going to pass through the intestine. So if you're trying to use it as a laxative, or if you have bowel issues, citrate is a really good form. Oxide is fine too. Again, it just doesn't really get absorbed very much at all into the body. So you're really just using it in the gut then. But those have their place, right? Because a lot of women struggle with constipation. That calm powder, Jamie, you know, natural calm, I use it a lot with patients because it does absorb pretty rapidly, but it does have a calming effect for people, even though that is citrate and we think of it more as having a bowel effect. People do feel calmer when they use that calm powder, but it is mostly magnesium citrate in that one. But yeah, what have you learned? I know that Jamie, you probably with your kind of, you know, hormone coaches and stuff, what do you teach about using magnesium? And what are your favorite kind of ways to go with that?
Yeah. Well, a lot of what we do is we call it cycle-centric lifestyle. So, you know, when I'm talking with people, you know, interested in hormone coaching, they say, what kind of like plan do you follow? Do you follow like a keto plan? Now I'm kind of shifting over to nutrition, but I promise you, Teresa, I'm answering your question. Do you talk about like more fasting? What's your like main thing? And I say, my main thing is we want to make sure that we're living in mind with our cycle. So cycle-centric lifestyle. So in this way, if we're thinking about a cycle-centric lifestyle and we're thinking about magnesium, we want to think while we're charting our cycle, because our cycle is a vital sign of health, when do we feel most anxious? And typically that's when we're saying, okay, try that magnesium glycinate. Magnesium glycinate is what I teach my students about most. But I know, like you were saying, magnesium threonate is more of a newer, kind of like more of a hotter magnesium these days in terms of, so I have more to learn on that. But magnesium glycinate specifically in the post-ovulatory phase. So we're kind of gearing up, especially if women struggle with PMS, that's typically what we're offering as an option or as a good idea. So if there's any anxiety, nervousness, insomnia, and a woman is struggling with her cycle or struggling with sleep, or like I was saying, any anxiety, we're looking at her cycle. And magnesium glycinate is typically what we bring into the fold with that cycle-centric lifestyle. So that's typically how I bring that in. Also, even just for painful menstrual cramps too, like magnesium is so helpful for that as well. And so that's typically how we talk about that.
Yeah, well, let's dig a little deeper into why glycinate is a good form for mental health and anxiety and premenstrual syndrome. And that's because actually the glycine part of it is a amino acid that helps with your GABA in your neurotransmitter system. So it helps to calm glutamate, which is what we call an excitatory neurotransmitter, and it's a GABA agonist. So it influences the GABA neurotransmitter, which is a calming neurotransmitter. Mm-hmm. So glycine with the magnesium is an additional bonus for your mental health because literally it is calming down your nervous system. And that's specifically why we want that one for people who are anxious or they struggle maybe with insomnia. And okay, so the daily recommended amount, Jamie, so this is the RDA for magnesium. So if we're just looking at like how much am I actually supposed to get? For women, it's 320 milligrams. For men, it's like 400 something. So that's kind of the recommended daily allowance. And again, food can be a great source of magnesium. However, just like when I talk about like the body struggles sometimes with holding on to magnesium because it needs to be bound to something, even with food, sometimes we have a hard time holding on to that magnesium. And it may be why we need to take a little bit more in a supplement. And that's because the body actually through the day can excrete 100 milligrams in urine and another like couple hundred in, just stool. So we take it in our diets, we actually lose quite a bit. And then add on, if you're a big exerciser, if you exercise a lot, you're going to dump more magnesium. If you're a high stress person, you dump more magnesium. And here's another thing to think about too, Jamie. If you're on oral contraceptive pills or birth control pills, or if you take heartburn medication like omeprazole or what we call a proton pump inhibitor, or if you're on a lot of different medications actually can influence the absorption of magnesium. So you might want to think about your medications and think, could I be on a medicine that could influence my magnesium? And that may mean, again, maybe I just need to take it in a supplement form, possibly. But the cool thing about magnesium, Jamie, is how safe it is. It is really ultimately something you cannot go toxic on unless you have a kidney problem, unless you have trouble with your kidneys and you don't know how to excrete it. Mm-hmm. But unlike some things like potassium, we have to be really careful about making sure we don't go overboard on potassium because that can cause heart arrhythmias. Magnesium is a pretty safe supplement. And so that's why I think we can be a little bit more generous or liberal in terms of saying, for most people out there, and again, like you said, talk to your doctor, but magnesium is a really safe supplement to take.
Totally. And then just even in terms of what foods magnesium is in, let's talk about that. I have a few suggestions and ways that we can start incorporating magnesium into our diet here. So I'm going to list out a few. All right, so some that I love to always, if anyone knows me well, avocados. Avocados are awesome. They are my favorite hormone healthy food on the planet. If you like avocado, Or even if you don't, but you want a New Year's resolution, maybe you're already listening to this in the new year, add an avocado, half of an avocado to your smoothie, into your scrambled eggs, whatever the case is. But avocados is a great source of magnesium. So that's always where I start. I love avocados. Nuts and seeds, so almonds, cashews, pumpkin seeds, sunflower seeds, those all have rich sources of magnesium. And again, we're just talking about a healthy diet. So if you're eating a healthy diet, chances are you're getting great amounts of magnesium. Beans, chickpeas, whole grains like brown rice, oats, that kind of thing. And then, of course, the leafy green vegetables. So the spinach, the kale, fish, like tuna and bananas, which explains how when we do get a muscle twitch, I know both Teresa and I were athletes in our younger years in college. I know every time I would get those twitching in my muscles, or, maybe, what's it called? Charlie horse, someone's like, go grab a banana.
Yeah.
Go grab a banana. And so the bananas also have, a very rich source of magnesium in them. Dark chocolate, dried fruits, dairy, of course, milk, cheese, that kind of thing. So we can include, we can think about how we can increase magnesium intake. But as we're eating a healthy diet, we're going to, be serving ourselves in many nutrient dense ways. But just like Teresa, you're saying, it's so true. Like if magnesium can help us in many ways, and like you said, over 300 processes in the body, there's 300 benefits to us. That would be a really great supplement to add. I also want to say too, anytime I think about me being stressed, literally, I think, oh, I'm so stressed right now. And I envision a glass of water or a glass of liquid. And I just imagine every time I'm stressed, I imagine that glass is filled with magnesium in my metaphorical example. And I'm pouring it out into the ground. Oh, I'm stressed. Oh my gosh, I'm pouring out all my magnesium. Oh, dear goodness. So the more stressed you are, the more that means you need magnesium, because when you're stressed, magnesium is going to be depleted. And so that's just another thing to think about. If you have a high stress life, you definitely need magnesium.
Yeah, that's really good. I want to go back to the food, because I have a list pulled up that has the exact milligrams. So I want to, again, so people can visualize this. I think that's always helpful in terms of again, if we just needed to get, let's say 320 milligrams of magnesium in food. So cashews, which are about my favorite nut in the world, those are about 83 milligrams of magnesium per about 15 nuts. Brazil nuts, which we talk about a lot because we talk about that with the selenium too and the thyroid, but that's the top of magnesium is Brazil nuts. You get 107 milligrams from 6 to 8 nuts of Brazil nuts. So it kind of feels like, again, the Brazil nuts, if you just ate a handful of Brazil nuts a day, from a health standpoint, you'd be pretty good. But the pumpkin seeds up there, if you love pumpkin seeds, I mean, Brazil nuts aren't usually people's favorites, but pumpkin seeds are great. And then the dark chocolate thing, Jamie, when we say dark chocolate, it has to be at least, I think, 70 to 80% cocoa. That's 65 milligrams per just 1 ounce that you get of magnesium in dark chocolate. So, I think these things taste good. The leafy green spinach is a huge one too. So that's another good one. But let's talk about the supplements, because I know people are always wanting to know this, which ones do I take really? And we talked about the magglycinate, and I think out of all of the magnesiums, you cannot go wrong with magglycinate. If you took 200 to 400 milligrams of magglycinate and probably before bedtime daily, I think you would be covered. It's a little extra. It would relax your body. And now, could you take more? Absolutely. Like when you talked about the premenstrual cramps or the uterine cramps with your period, you could take 400, even up to 3 times a day of magglycinate. Now that's a heftier dose, but for someone who has pretty bad cramps, that could be really therapeutic for helping menstrual cramps. How do I know if it's too much? Well, if you get a laxative effect from any magnesium, probably you hit your threshold of magnesium on it. So just back up a little bit. If you get too much magnesium, your poop will tell you, and then back up the dose. They talk about magnesium malate being really good for energy. So athletes, maybe if you're somebody who's depleting a lot with running or, sport, any high intensity sport, magnesium malate, which is malic acid, and this type of it's a type of citric acid as well. It helps to create that ATP. So that's really good for muscles. And then the threonate one, which Jamie, you said you were kind of interested in one, because that is, I think, the one people are kind of like talking about. It's the buzz one lately, because it's been a little bit newer, but L-threonate gets talked about, especially because it's thought that it passes through the blood-brain barrier in a better way, in a more fluid way than other forms of magnesium. So mag-threonate, I use that one particularly for people who have migraines. Now, magnesium glycinate would work also. In fact, studies have shown really any form of magnesium can reduce the intensity and the frequency of migraines by about 50% if you're taking that 400 to 600 milligrams of magnesium a day. It doesn't rid migraines fully, but it reduces the frequency and the intensity of them. But the L-threonate form is really good for memory, for poor concentration, for brain fog. And so that L-threonate form, if you're someone who's really trying to focus on brain health, that is when you want to look at. And there are some studies that are showing that magnesium deficiency can be associated with Alzheimer's. These are preliminary studies. So people, if they take a large group, those who will end up with Alzheimer's have a higher incidence of magnesium deficiency. So that's one disease I know most of us really don't want to get. So really thinking about magnesium for brain health is a great idea.
And you mentioned too that there were, I think you said there were complexes, magnesium complex, or a combination of them. What complexes, or what's a complex example of the different magnesium types that are often found together?
Yeah, I probably won't be able to tell you off the head. I mean, I've seen them with oxide mixed with glycinate or an orotate one. You can pretty much mix anything you want together in different forms. So I think that I have one right now from Swanson Vitamin, and I'm pretty sure it's an oxide and citrate. So oxide and citrate, which again is the one that's not absorbed as readily well. So I took it 3 times yesterday. So when you're taking one that isn't as absorbed, is not as bioavailable, sometimes you have to take it multiple times a day. But yeah, you can pretty much find them in lots of different combinations. So I like the other part, Jamie, is transdermal. And maybe, with your experience with essential oils, talking about transdermal magnesium might be helpful. I know my first experience with transdermal magnesium was with my dad. He had really bad numbness and tingling on the bottom of his feet, kind of an unexplained neuropathy. And the doctor gave him lidocaine to put on his feet. But I told him, why don't we try this magnesium spray? It's like an oil, I think it was something ancient oils. And he got so much more relief from the magnesium oil with his numbness and tingling. So that was kind of like my first experience really seeing magnesium topically work. And so we also know about Epsom salts, which is magnesium sulfate. And those can be put in a bathtub, and people find that to be very calming. But what do you know about topical, Jamie?
Yeah, well, anything that is applied topically enters into our bloodstream almost immediately. And so that's what's so nice about topical, is that it's systemic, it can enter into our bloodstream so quick. And I was just going to say too, as you were talking about your dad, is my kids, if they're struggling with bedtime, my oldest daughter, she really struggles with bedtime. So she always is taking a magnesium. But I just saw, I think probably on Instagram or somewhere, Teresa, that there's a little magnesium stick that you can rub on the bottom of your kids' feet before bed. And really on the bottom of the feet, which, you were mentioning with your father, but bottom of the feet, really, you wouldn't think it, but it's true. And it makes sense that you would absorb more from your feet than really anywhere else in your body more quickly. Because if you think about in the olden days when we didn't have shoes, our body is so intelligent. We don't even realize, even just us walking through the woods or through the forest or on the ground, wherever we're at, our body is intelligent. We get data from what we're stepping on, but it also is very healthy for us, like barefoot running. People talk about that a lot. But you also want to be careful about what you're stepping on, because again, if you're cleaning, your floor with a chemical and you don't have socks on, again, the absorption of those chemicals can be very harmful to your body. So, main point, if you want a quick, fast, if you want a quick result, putting it on your skin is smart. The lasting effect is less. So it's not going to last in your system for as long. It's going to kind of wither away and you're going to have to do it again in an hour or two. But just knowing that is important.
Yeah, I know. One of the podcasts I listened to in preparation for this was my Peter Attia. I talk about him. I have a lot. But he just did a magnesium one. So if you want another magnesium podcast, Peter Attia has one that he's recently released. But he takes Slow Mag, and that's just a brand. It's called Slow Mag. That's magnesium chloride, but it's supposed to like kind of have an enteric coated capsule so that it absorbs more slowly. So that's his preferred magnesium. I know my daughter has taken lots of magnesiums because she has struggled with constipation. So we've tried a lot of different ones for that. I like Global Healing's Oxy powder. It's called an oxygenated magnesium. That's really good for constipation. Global Healing, I have no, disclosure to make with them, but Global Healing's magnesium for constipation, really good. Garden of Life has these gummies, magnesium gummies that I think are really good, easy for kids to take. And I know there's lots of good brands from Thorne and Jarrow, and Now is a great brand. So if you're looking for brands to check out for magnesium glycinate, those are a few. The last thing, Jamie, I want to talk about is like, people will wonder, should I get my blood tested? Kind of like vitamin D deficiency. It's pretty easy to test vitamin D for deficiency, but magnesium's a little tricky. So when people ask me, can you test and see if I have magnesium deficiency? I'll be like, you know what? Because only 0.3% of our magnesium, 0.3% is in our serum, doing a blood test for magnesium is not a good representation of really our magnesium levels. And it actually, can be a little bit confusing. So I don't generally draw them. Now, there is a better test called the RBC magnesium test. That's a red blood cell magnesium. That gives a better representation of magnesium levels. So I will run that sometimes. But I think, again, it's okay to, based on people's symptoms and in general, to kind of assume we need a little more magnesium and to not really worry about a blood test. But if you are going to get one, make sure you ask for the RBC magnesium, and you want your level to be at the higher end of the reference range. That's over 6, basically, on the reference range. So that's what I know about the blood test. Really, you'd have to probably do like a 24-hour urine to get a better idea of like magnesium levels and other tests that are just too complicated.
Mm-hmm. Isn't it interesting that while we may be learning about magnesium, and our listeners, ladies, all of you, men, you've likely heard about magnesium in the past. We all have heard a little bit about it, like how we can use it to calm our nervous system, but how sometimes it still seems like life is so overwhelming, even still, to be doing these things. And that's okay. But something I want to say to you ladies, is if you're struggling with anxiety or pain or whatever symptoms you're struggling with now, try the magnesium supplement. Absolutely, yes. But I always think about what are other things going on in our life that may be causing that stress. So while I might be stressed because maybe finances are hard, or maybe marriage is hard, or maybe parenting is hard, or maybe I'm in extreme pain that I'm not getting relief from, and we can take in those magnesiums, or we can take in our supplements, and we can take in these things. But if we're looking only to those things for that relief, sometimes I think it's like throwing a thimble of water into a blazing fire at times in our life. So what does that mean? What am I trying to say? What I'm trying to say is work through the root. I know for me, sometimes, even though magnesium or any other thing we talk about on this podcast can seem like it's going to fix all our problems, sometimes it is still that Band-Aid, almost like that Band-Aid on top of the issue. And so my encouragement for you all is to think about what might be at the root of what's causing that issue and start there. While, again, like Teresa is saying, magnesium is not like a harmful thing. I mean, take it and your body will tell you if you've had enough. But sometimes that's not the only thing we need, and often it's not. So thinking about some other things that might be reducing that stress. I'm going to share one story, Teresa, because I can tell you want to say something quick. I read a book. I can't remember what it was. The book was encouraging me, think about your life. What in your life is causing you stress? And then you list out all the things that are stressing you out. And then you look at that list, and it's encouraging you to think, if you could pick one stressor to get rid of, maybe that the circumstance doesn't change, but the way it affects you does. How many on those lists are the things that's causing the most stress? And often it's just a couple. There might be 10 things on the list that are stressing you out, but often it's just a couple that are the hardest things. The encouragement was, what can you do to address those two main things? It's like the 80-20 rule. 20% is what's causing 80% of your issue. And what can you do to address those two things? And when I read that, I thought this one thing was a stressor to me. And I decided to get counseling for that one thing. And it helped me in so many ways. So I want to encourage you listening. If you are stressed, and I'm talking about stress, Teresa, because typically when I think of magnesium, I think stress. Although we learned today that magnesium helps in more ways than just reducing stress. Think about what are those things that are causing the most stress and really start pinpointing that. Because when we look at a list, sometimes we can get overwhelmed. We think, oh, all these things are causing stress. But often it's just one or two things, or if those two things were resolved or handled in a way, life would seem less stressful or overwhelming. I hope that's making sense. Teresa, what are your thoughts?
No, I think that's great. I mean, again, we can't fix our problems with a supplement. I think that's the kind of the bottom line there, Jamie, is that you're trying to say is like, we think magnesium is awesome, and that's why we're doing this podcast. And a supplement could be beneficial to you. But there's so many other things at the root of sometimes what we're feeling and experiencing, and getting to the root is always the best thing you can do for your health. Right. So yeah, I think that's great, Jamie. And I think, we'll wrap up this podcast on magnesium today. I love talking about it, and hopefully we'll get to another nutrient that's as powerful that we can talk about too. I'm sure there is plenty more that we can learn. So thanks, Jamie, and we'll see you on the next one.
All right. Thanks, Teresa.
Thanks for listening to the Hormone Genius podcast. Please remember to share our podcast with your friends and family, and also follow us on social media. If you were not aware, we have a YouTube channel. So if you could like and subscribe to our YouTube channel to stay in the loop with all of our latest episodes, we would appreciate that. Thank you so much for your support. We are excited to journey alongside you as you discover the beauty and the genius of your hormones.